Hey guys, I am recording this on the 25th of August 2016, and many people consider this to be the birthday of the Linux kernel. Basically, 25 years ago today, Linus Torvalds announced to the Minix news group that he was working on a new project. That project turned out, of course, to be the Linux kernel. Now, there are other days people choose to celebrate Linux's birthday. Some people choose to celebrate the initial release. But since that's in October, and I just wanted to really make a video talking about why Linux was important to me and its relevance and why I make videos on YouTube about it, I thought today just might be a good day to make that video. So I was first introduced to SUSE Linux. I used to call it SUSE at the time. When I was I think maybe about 7 or 8 years old, we loaded it, dual booted it onto the old family computer, and it was very difficult to do. It took us many days, a lot of reading through the documentation. Fortunately enough, me and my father had the foresight to actually read all the documentation before actually getting involved in installing Linux, and that made the process at least straightforward, but it was still very convoluted at the time. This was so we were introduced to the KDE desktop. It also came with the GNOME desktop, and it came with the YaST tools, which were really quite user friendly, especially for the time, but even by like today's standards, to configure and set up a system. It also came bundled with a lot of software out of the box, games, and admittedly not like fancy games that we're used to playing nowadays. These are Minesweepers and chess and backgammon and all that kind of stuff, but it was still exciting to explore that new turf. But as sort of games came out, and as technology sort of moved on, as someone that was very young, I just felt that Linux wasn't fulfilling those kind of needs. It wasn't necessarily doing what I wanted it to do. And of course, when the options in the open source world were significantly more limited back then, I guess that would have been more understandable. Now, I always considered Linux to be a superior operating system from a technical standpoint. It's always just how I looked at it, how it worked for me. And it did seem to, of course, get a lot less viruses than Windows. It did seem to be a lot better structured than Windows. So it was always something that was in my mind at one place or another, but it was just never the go-to distribution that I'd want for things like games, or for things like even internet and drivers for modems, because of course this was around the time when the internet and high-speed internet was really quite new, and of course very few people really even had it. So I wanted to sort of get on that bleeding edge, and as a result really needed to get rid of Linux because I didn't have the resources available to make this incredible fast technological growth work on Linux. And I was a kid at the time, so go easy on me. So I came back to Linux when I was off to university. I was given my first laptop, my first sort of personal, this is your machine, you can do whatever you like with it. And it came with, I think it was Windows 2000 or a Windows from that era, Windows ME. And I thought, you know what, this is my opportunity to actually, jump all in. This is my chance to actually install Linux just as I'm going to university, and then I'll be forced to learn it. I won't have anywhere else to go. I won't be able to just reinstall a copy of Windows. In fact, I think I completely wiped the Windows copy off, and it was one of those things where it was installed on a backup partition. I wiped the backup partition. I was completely ditching Windows there and then, and the operating system that I decided to ditch it for was Fedora Core 5, I think. 5, 6, maybe 7. And I gotta say, actually, there were, again, teething troubles, as you do, and especially from adopting a Linux distribution at that time. But Fedora was really pretty stable, in all honesty. I ran into very few actual bugs, and most of it was just trying to work out how the system worked and learning new things and learning where to look for help and all this kind of stuff. Those were the biggest hurdles that I really had when I used and chose Fedora as my first distribution. And then after, through university, I cycled through just about every Linux distribution available at the time imaginable, even a few BSD distributions, and I had an amazing time doing it. I was discovering this software that people were coming together from all corners of the world to build, and it was inspiring in a way that just nothing else in my life was. Like how, you look around the world and you see division and stuff falling apart and people arguing, and you look at the open source world and you see people just, getting on with stuff and fixing problems and building things and being a creative and positive influence on the world without letting petty differences get in the way. And I still feel about the community, for the large part, even to this day, and certainly I feel much more about it than any other almost part of human civilization, in a way that we seem to have this common goal, and we come from all different kinds of backgrounds. We have all different kinds of politics. We have all different kinds of perspectives on the world, and yet we let that all work together. And basically, Linux and the open source world, and the GNU user spaces, there's the result of all of that work together, and the result of all that sort of all of those positive traits of humanity all condensed into a software movement, and you've got where we effectively are today. But that's not why I really got into Linux, and as inspiring as that story is, that's not why I'm here today. That's not why I make videos for YouTube. It's maybe a little bit more for self-serving reasons, or maybe it's because we find it easier to empathize with people that go through similar struggles to ourselves. But for me, my highest formal qualification in IT is a C in GCSE. So for those of you that aren't from the UK, that's effectively the qualification that you get among other GCSEs. At age 16, you spend 2 years working towards it. So you start a GCSE course at 14, and you spend 2 years doing coursework and exams, and then at the end of it, you're supposed to get a GCSE. It's a pretty base level formal qualification. You've got AS levels and A levels, and then you've got college degrees, and then you've got university degrees on top of that. And then there's BTEC qualifications, which again are worth more than GCSEs. So there's GCSEs are sort of the they're the qualifications that you get for at 16. And I never really saw eye to eye on many occasions with formal education. I was always at odds with it, and effectively, as for reasons I won't go into right now, it's complicated and whatever. I ended up getting, although I got 100% on the GCSE exam, still ended up getting a C, and it really disheartened me. And the entire sort of formal education of IT in secondary school for me completely just crushed me, and it made me feel stupid, despite the fact that, younger in my life, I was playing around with Linux. In fact, I even made a game that many people in school played. Like, it became like a miniature craze. It was just this little exe file that was a clone of Space Invaders, but then I brought in mouse control, and then I brought in different, and I moved the aliens in different directions, and it became a kind of a game all in and of itself, like a parody of Space Invaders, a sort of unofficial Space Invaders 2, as it were. And so I clearly was more capable of getting a C in GCSE IT than that. But it was that sort of process that really nailed it into me, that there were barriers to entry for IT, that people were always going to have trouble getting over. And some of those barriers was just, the education process. Some of those barriers was going to be cost. I never had a lot of money, and still don't to this day. And going through university, saving every penny that you can, being able to learn about computers using free software, and I'm talking about free as in gratis. I'm talking about free as in you don't have to pay for it. I'm not even talking about freedom at this point. But when, you are struggling with an education system that's not teaching you about what you want to learn, when you don't have the money to go out and get private education, to take courses, to even travel to conventions or anything like that, and when all you've got is a computer and access to the internet, the open source world actually managed to reinvigorate my love for computers. They managed to teach me so much more than formal education ever could. And I feel that is not just my story, but that is the story of so many people who can't afford licensed software, who can't afford formal education, or who don't have access to it. And the open source actually has this, and Linux as well, which is the sort of almost the foundation of this, because to have a truly open source operating system, you need the open source kernel, you need the open source user space. It all comes together in one big project, as it were, or at least one big movement. And to me, a lot of open source software is just about lowering the bar to education and lowering the bar to becoming part of this community. And lowering the bar sometimes means making things cheaper. Sometimes it means giving away the free software so that people can then learn it, and they can use it, and they can share it, and they can support it. And not everyone's a programmer, but some people can donate. Some people can signal boost. Some people can design artwork. Some people can write documentation. There are so many things. There is a place for everyone in the open source world. And, and I owe so much to it. Absolutely, I owe so much to it. Because at a time when I, didn't have anywhere else to turn, it allowed me to work, to solve my own problems. Right? It wasn't some helping hand that guided me out of the darkness. It was a ladder that I had to climb myself. And that, to me, is what makes it so important, is that it wasn't the only person to recognize my existence in a desperate time of need. It was at a time when I was trying really hard and having every door shut in my face, that it just allowed that one more door to be opened, that allowed me to educate myself when there wasn't anyone willing to guide me through the process. And now that I am, here, and now that I have some incredibly amazing software at my disposal, I guess I just feel compelled to share it with as many people as possible, and that's really why I make YouTube videos, and that's really what this channel's about. Yes, the freedom of software code is important. The transparency of open source software is important. The importance of freedom of speech is essential, not only to just a free way of life, but to democracy and to even understanding the political world in which we live. Yes, all of these things, super important. But when people sort of are just quick to jump that when we say free software, we aren't just talking about the fiscal side of things, it's important to bear in mind that so much open source software being free is incredibly important to the process as well. Because I'm sure I'm not the only person who can't afford to learn how to edit movies by going out and buying a £700 piece of software. And even then, what if I wanted to learn audio as well? Do I have to buy another piece of software? And another piece of software if I want to learn about how to make a video game as well, because there are a good number of just open source gaming engines available in the repositories as well. If I want, and I can try out different software as well and become comfortable as well, because it's not just about providing you with the tools, it's about providing you with the tools that suit you and providing you with the tools that you like as well. Because, you can't learn unless you're in a comfortable environment, or at least I personally feel that way. So a lot of it all just builds into a very constructive society, a very constructive community that we've built here, and it's in a time when there are so few positive things to say, this is something worth holding on to, I think. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up here, but just I thought I might share a personal story with you on one of the birthdays of the Linux kernel. But I'm so glad it's here, and I'm so glad that this community is here. I owe more to it than you guys will ever know. But thank you very much for watching. That's about it from me today. And until next time, I've been Chris Ware, and you've been awesome. Take care now.